Excellent. Altitude's looking good. Scanner is working despite the heavy weather. And it's already found some ship parts. But they're not the ones I need. Well, hopefully this little tiny probe that I've just sent out will find the bits I need to get off this ice planet once and for all. But in the meantime, I want to talk about Godzilla 1998. Because recently, I mean very recent, there was an announcement a couple of days ago by the company Spiral Studios, who are making this huge statue of the Godzilla from that 1998 movie. However, they've called it Zilla. And now I know that this is a licensing thing with Toho, because they, for the movie Final Wars, which I have right here, which came out in 2005, I believe, or 2004, they had Godzilla fight loads of different monsters, and at one point in this movie they have their version of Godzilla fight the American Godzilla, but they renamed it Zilla because they didn't like this version of Godzilla. They didn't think it was godly enough, so they took the word God out of the name and branded it Zilla. They've even gone so far as to have the two pit against each other in IDW Comics, and there's been this sort of internal discussion amongst the fandom ever since Zilla became a thing, where some fans call the original 1998 Godzilla Zilla and consider it not really a real Godzilla. But I wanted to give my perspective on this because I think it's really stupid, and and I'll explain why. The whole changing the character Zilla is fine in my books. I think it's fun in Godzilla Final Wars. It is really funny to see this version of Godzilla get its ass kicked by the classic Godzilla. However, I don't buy into the whole rhetoric around the fact that the Godzilla from 1998 is not a Godzilla, because it is a Godzilla. It's a version of Godzilla. It's just a version of Godzilla where he's a mutated lizard from nuclear fallout who appears in New York and attacks a Japanese fishing vessel, and this old fisherman says Godzilla, Godzilla, and names him Godzilla based on what is in the canon of this movie is a mythological sea dragon who filled Japanese sailors' hearts with fear, as they say.
Godzilla. Godzilla.
Godzilla. That's what Japanese sailors called him in song, a mythological sea dragon who filled their hearts with fear.
Oh my god!
So this is kind of like a standalone story, a version of Godzilla where it's more, dare I say it, realistic, even though the film's not realistic at all, but you can kind of believe that this creature could potentially exist more than something that's absolute gargantuan-sized monster who breathes atomic breath and all that jazz, you know. Especially when you get to like some of the Showa era Godzilla films and he's like flying and going up in space and doing all that jazz. Like, that's less believable than this one, is basically my point. But I also don't understand and I'm going to use the word again, rhetoric around this film, Godzilla not being a true Godzilla, as they say, because I ask myself, well, what is a true Godzilla? Because the evidence that I've heard from some fans in the Godzilla fandom as to why this one's not a true Godzilla is mainly down to two things. One, he dies, and two, he doesn't breathe atomic fire. Those seem to be the two big sticking points. But then that makes me think, well, hang on a second, that's not really, that doesn't really make Godzilla Godzilla, because he dies in the original 1954 film. He dies at the end of Godzilla vs. Destroyer. And so that doesn't really work. The breathing atomic fire thing is more credible. However, they do address that in this movie, because he has this breath that he breathes out that's like so powerful. It's like a hurricane just comes out of his mouth. And we see a couple of times in this movie he uses it to blow cars away and blow stuff up, and the fire from the explosion then gets carried by the wind. So they do address that point in this movie. It's not like he actually breathes fire, but he breathes wind really loud because his roar is so powerful. Yeah, so it kind of does nothing out of the ordinary for the Godzilla formula, really, except for the fact that he doesn't actually physically breathe fire. So to hear people say that this Godzilla breaks the Godzilla formula always sits funny with me, because there's no such thing, as far as I can tell, as a specific Godzilla formula. I mean, for example, take one of the newest films, Shin Godzilla. This Godzilla is nuts. It starts off as this like giant tadpole thing. It's bleeding all over the place. It can unlock its jaw to breathe fire, breathe its atomic laser, essentially. And by the end of the movie, it's breaking up into smaller humanoid Godzillas. That doesn't sound like any other Godzilla I know, yet everyone considers it a Godzilla film. So I don't get the whole Godzilla, this Godzilla breaks from the formula. On the whole topic of him dying, I feel like that's also a little bit of a misconception when it comes to this film, because technically speaking, Godzilla does not die in this film, because right at the end of the movie there's an egg which hatches and Godzilla survives, and that's what leads to the animated series, if you count that as canon. I don't know if I do with each other, but it's good in its own right. And I look on the back, like he's breathing atomic fire right on the back there, and this time it's green. So it's like you needed this Godzilla to evolve into this one. But anyway, the point is, Godzilla survives in some capacity. It might not be the very specific Godzilla that attacked the city, but the essence of that character carries on. And it's kind of like the end of Godzilla vs. Destroyer, when he dies and his power or spirit, or whatever you want to call it, his essence goes into the son of Godzilla, who then carries on the legacy. And it's the same thing that like is alluded to at the end of here. So yeah, I just don't get this whole Godzilla formula and why this Godzilla is not considered a Godzilla. It makes absolutely no sense to me. The character of Zilla, though, makes sense, and so this statue has caused loads of controversy on, it's been mainly on Twitter, really. But I've seen lots of people in the Godzilla fandom talking about this, and what confused me was, I don't mind if they want to make a Zilla statue based on, the character from Godzilla Final Wars or the comic books. But what I don't get is why the statue is like of the 1998 Godzilla film, and they've even put it like on the box art. It's like standing in the rain, and I think it's like emulating a scene from this movie here. So I don't fully understand why they've called this one Zilla, and why they couldn't just call it Godzilla, using the logo that you can see I've got up here. Like, I don't know why they had to go with the licensing of Zilla. I don't know if that was like Toho trying to rewrite history, because they're so butthurt over the fact that they don't like this Godzilla, which then makes me question why Toho is so quick to dump on this Godzilla for doing certain things, but then are quite happy to change up Godzilla however they so wish. I don't get it. It seems really petty. And one final point I just want to bring up concerning the canonicity with this film, that I hear a lot of fans talk about. They talk about how, like, oh, it's not a real Godzilla because, of Zilla in Final Wars, but I also hear some fans bring up Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out attack, which, if you don't know, this film came out in 2003, it says on the back here, and this movie is a direct sequel to the original 1954 film. And there's a line of dialogue in this film where a character says something along the lines of, a giant monster attacked New York and everyone said it was Godzilla, but it wasn't, which is a gag nod back to this one. And I've heard some Godzilla fans out there consider like the canon of these movies to go the original 1954 film, this movie, and then this one being kind of like a spin-off. But that makes absolutely no sense because of two things. One, in this movie, there was no attack of a giant Godzilla in 1954 when there was in this one. So you would think if there was a giant monster attack, Japan in 1954, that would get mentioned in this movie. So that just does not work. That's just hogwash is what that is. That's hogwash, and you know it. So yeah, the whole Godzilla Zilla thing, this is it summed up. This film, the monster in this movie specifically, it's Godzilla. Hands down, it's Godzilla. Says it right there. It's on the box. They say it in the movie, and they say it in the series. It's Godzilla. Godzilla all over. The character in Final Wars that looks exactly like this character that they've taken the mick out of, Zilla. In the comic books, it's Zilla, right? This statue, they've called it Zilla, but they've given it the look of the 1998 film. That's just confusing. That's just really confusing. Just call it Godzilla. Don't try and rewrite history, basically, is my position on this, if that's what's happening. So all the people I've seen on Twitter who are going, well, why are you worried? It's just a name change. That exact question, I level at Toho. What's the problem? Why are you changing the name? So just keep it as Godzilla. So anyway, that's my rant for today. A bit of a random video, and hang on a second. It's just discovered a crashed JP Merchoid ship.